Before 1879, the mind was a philosopher's problem. No labs, no data, just ideas. Then one man built a laboratory and started measuring it. The science of psychology was born. Wilhelm Wundt was a German physician who had spent years studying physiology. He believed the mind could be studied the way physicists studied force, by measuring it precisely under controlled conditions. In 1879, he opened the first formal psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig. Wundt's method was called introspection. Trained observers would report their own conscious experiences in response to stimuli, a tone, a flash of light, a color. The goal was not to understand feelings or memories. It was to identify the basic building blocks of conscious experience. The problem was reliability. Two trained observers could experience the same stimulus and report completely different things. There was no way to verify whose report was correct. Introspection was subjective by design. This flaw would eventually inspire psychologists to abandon it entirely in favor of observable behavior. Wundt's student Edward Titchener brought these ideas to America and named the approach structuralism. Structuralists believed the mind, like the body, could be broken into its component parts. Just as chemistry analyzes molecules, structuralism would catalog the elements of thought, sensation, and feeling. While Wundt cataloged the elements of mind, William James at Harvard asked a completely different question. He was not interested in what the mind was made of. He wanted to know what it did. Why does consciousness exist at all? What is it for? James argued that trying to freeze consciousness into separate elements was like trying to catch a river in a jar. Consciousness is not a thing. It is a process, continuous, flowing, always changing. He called it the stream of consciousness, one of the most influential metaphors in psychology. James drew on Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. If mental processes had evolved, they must serve a purpose. Memory helps us learn from the past. Emotion guides us towards safety. Perception helps us navigate the world. This approach became known as functionalism, studying the purpose of mental processes, not their structure. In 1890, James published Principles of Psychology, a 1,200-page book that took him 12 years to write. It covered consciousness, habit, emotion, memory, and perception. It is still considered one of the most important books in the history of psychology, and James one of its most influential figures. In Germany, a group of psychologists argued that Wundt had it completely backwards. The mind does not experience elements one at a time. It perceives wholes. A melody is not just a sequence of notes. A face is not just eyes, nose, and mouth. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They called this Gestalt. Sigmund Freud in Vienna took psychology in a very different direction. He argued that most of human behavior is driven by unconscious forces, desires, and conflicts that we are not aware of. His approach, psychoanalysis, focused on dreams, slips of speech, and the patient's childhood to uncover these hidden forces. In 1913, John Watson published a paper that changed the direction of American psychology. He argued that introspection was useless, and the unconscious could never be observed. Psychology should only study what can be seen and measured, behavior. Not thoughts, not feelings. Only actions. This approach became known as behaviorism. B.F. Skinner took Watson's behaviorism further than anyone. He studied how consequences shape behavior. Rewards increase it, punishments decrease it. He demonstrated this in rats, pigeons, and argued it applied to all organisms, including humans. His work on reinforcement and conditioning remains one of the most replicated findings in psychology. Today, no single school dominates psychology. Instead, psychologists use 7 major perspectives, each like a different lens pointed at the same behavior. The biological perspective asks what is happening in the brain and body. Brain chemistry, hormones, genetics, and neural circuits all shape how we think, feel, and act. The psychodynamic perspective, rooted in Freud and updated by later theorists, examines how unconscious processes and early childhood experiences shape adult behavior. The behavioral perspective, descended from Watson and Skinner, focuses on how environment and learned associations drive actions without reference to internal mental states. The cognitive perspective examines internal mental processes, how we perceive, remember, think, and solve problems. It treats the mind like an information processing system. The humanistic perspective, developed by Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, rejects determinism and emphasizes human potential, free will, and the drive towards self-actualization. The socio-cultural perspective examines how culture, society, and social norms shape behavior. The same action can mean completely different things in different cultures. The evolutionary perspective asks which behaviors were adaptive for our ancestors. Natural selection shaped not just bodies but minds, including our tendency to fear snakes, remember faces, and form social bonds. Most psychologists today take an eclectic approach, drawing from multiple perspectives depending on the question. A person with depression might need biological treatment through medication, cognitive therapy to change thought patterns, and socio-cultural awareness of how stress in their environment contributes. No single lens explains everything. Good psychology uses all of them.